The number of potential future popes continues to grow as 21 new names have been added to the Catholic Church's most exclusive club.
In the fullness of time, the Father sent His eternal Word.
No, not really. Pope Francis as a new pope.
The Son sent by the Father came as a life-giving gift.
Cardinal Luis Tagle has just made a statement that has sent shockwaves through the Catholic world. "I am taking charge," he proclaimed, setting off a flurry of speculation about his bold intentions and the future of the Church. The Catholic Church, already at a crossroads, now finds itself on the verge of a new chapter, one that could redefine its global mission and influence. Let's follow how the Vatican will change from this point forward. The rise of a new voice. This announcement is a big deal. It isn't just about one man's ambitions or a popularity contest among cardinals. It's about the direction of the Catholic Church at a time when it's teetering between the weight of centuries-old traditions and the loud, persistent demands of a world that's moving faster than ever before. Whether this prominent cleric becomes pope or not, his name and what he represents are now at the center of a conversation about where the Church is heading. Beneath the surface lies a truth that could redefine faith. His rise isn't a coincidence. This figure didn't just appear out of nowhere to stir the pot. He's been making waves for years, particularly in Asia, where Catholicism is growing faster than it is in the Western world. He's known for advocating for a more compassionate, inclusive church. One that's less about rigid rules and more about meeting people where they're at, whether that's in a slum, a refugee camp, or an overcrowded hospital. But that doesn't mean everyone's on board with his ideas. Some folks within the Vatican see his progressive leanings as a threat to the very essence of Catholicism. The Catholic Church has been at this kind of crossroads before, but this time the stakes feel even higher, with Pope Francis's health increasingly in question. And let's not forget, the man is nearing 90. The Church is going to need a clear plan for what comes next. And this Cardinal's announcement, cryptic as it might have been, feels like a chess move in a much larger game. He isn't just some figurehead, he's a thinker and a doer, and his focus on issues like social justice, climate change, and helping the marginalized has earned him fans across the globe. But not everyone's clapping. Inside the Vatican, there's a tug of war between the traditionalists who want to keep things as they've always been, and the reformers who think the Church needs to wake up and smell the 21st century. His ideas, like giving women more roles in the Church and tackling systemic issues head-on, are ruffling some pretty big feathers. Let's not forget about the power dynamics at play. The Vatican isn't just some spiritual haven, it's a political beast. Behind closed doors, alliances are being formed, strategies are being plotted, and every word spoken, especially ones as loaded as his, are being dissected. Some believe he's exactly the kind of leader the Church needs to stay relevant in a world that's changing faster than ever. Others fear he'll push the Church too far, too fast, creating rifts that might be impossible to mend. And let's talk about the elephant in the room. Pope Francis. He's been a game changer in many ways, shaking up traditions and focusing on mercy and inclusion. But his health is clearly a growing concern. The whispers about his hospital visits and struggles to keep up with the demands of his role are getting louder. His eventual departure, whether by choice or necessity, is going to leave a vacuum. Will this leader be the one to fill it? And if he is, can he handle the enormous pressure that comes with leading over 1 billion Catholics? If he does end up in the top spot, expect big changes. He's all about action over ceremony. His idea of a modern church isn't just about tweaking a few rules here and there. It's about a full-on cultural shift. Think less about lavish processions and more about rolling up sleeves and addressing real-world issues like poverty, climate change, and inequality. But with those changes come risks. His progressive stance could alienate the conservative factions of the Church, potentially leading to even deeper divisions. Now, let's not pretend the Catholic Church is just about the Vatican or the West. The global South, places like the Philippines, Nigeria, and Brazil, is where the Church is booming. His roots in the Philippines and his deep understanding of these regions make him a unique bridge between the Church's traditional European stronghold and the growing youthful congregations of the South. If he becomes Pope, it could signal a major shift in focus, with the Vatican paying much more attention to these dynamic, rapidly growing communities. But the big question remains, can his vision unite the Church, or will it create a bigger divide? The tension between reformers and traditionalists isn't just an internal Vatican issue. It's a reflection of the broader struggles happening in society. Change is hard, and for an institution as old and deeply rooted as the Catholic Church, it's even harder. The stakes couldn't be higher. The Catholic Church isn't just a religious organization. It's a global institution with enormous influence. The decisions made in the next few years will shape its future for generations. Whether this cardinal is the one to lead that charge or not, the discussions he's sparked are already setting the stage for what's to come. His background offers a lot of insight into the kind of leader he might be. Born in 1957 in Manila, the capital of the Philippines, he grew up in a country where Catholicism is deeply woven into the culture. His upbringing was modest, and he often speaks about the importance of humility and service, values that were instilled in him from a young age. He studied theology and quickly rose through the ranks, not just because of his intellect, but also because of his charisma and ability to connect with people. His tenure as the Archbishop of Manila from 2011 to 2019 showcased his ability to lead with both compassion and practicality. During that time, he focused on helping the poor and marginalized, frequently speaking out against corruption and inequality. His sermons often emphasized mercy and love over judgment, resonating with everyday people who felt left behind by a church that sometimes seemed out of touch. In 2019, he was appointed as the prefect of the Congregation for the Evangelization of Peoples, a role that expanded his influence beyond Asia to the global stage. This position put him in charge of missionary work and spreading the Catholic faith, tasks that align perfectly with his vision of an inclusive and outward-facing church. But it also put him under the microscope, with every move scrutinized by both supporters and critics. One of the things that set him apart is his ability to bridge divides. He's a man who can speak to both the young and the old, the rich and the poor, the progressive and the traditional. But that doesn't mean he's immune to criticism. Traditionalists within the Vatican worry that his emphasis on social justice and inclusivity might come at the expense of doctrine. They fear that his approach could dilute the Church's teachings, making it harder to maintain a clear and unified message. But his supporters argue that his vision is exactly what the Church needs to stay relevant. In a world where fewer people identify as religious and more are skeptical of institutions, a leader who prioritizes compassion and action could help rebuild trust. His focus on issues like climate change and poverty also aligns with the concerns of younger generations, who are increasingly vocal about wanting a church that addresses real-world problems. The debate over his potential leadership isn't just about him, it's about the future of the Catholic Church itself. If he becomes Pope, his papacy could mark a turning point, one that either revitalizes the Church or deepens its internal divisions. The path he chooses to take and how he navigates the pushback from traditionalists will shape not just his legacy, but also the future of over 1 billion Catholics worldwide. Some might wonder if the Church is even ready for a leader like him. His progressive ideas, while appealing to many, are also deeply polarizing. The Vatican has always been a place of tradition, and any attempts to modernize are met with resistance. His ability to lead effectively will depend on whether he can bring people together and create a sense of unity, even among those who disagree with him. Then there's the question of timing. The Catholic Church is at a crossroads, facing challenges that range from declining membership in the West to scandals that have shaken its credibility. The next pope will need to address these issues head-on, and that's no small task. If he is chosen, he'll have to hit the ground running, balancing the need for reform with the need to preserve the Church's core values. His potential papacy could also signal a shift in the Church's focus. For centuries, the Vatican has been centered in Europe, both geographically and culturally. But the growth of Catholicism in the global South is changing the dynamics. Countries like the Philippines, Brazil, and Nigeria are becoming the new strongholds of the faith, and a leader like him could help the Church better reflect this new reality. As Cardinal Tagle's announcement stirs the world, let's look back at the history that shaped the papacy. 2,000 years of papal politics. All right, before we jump into the new chapter of Luis Tagle taking over as Pope, let's dive into a whirlwind tour of the popes who came before him. Each one left their mark, for better or worse, shaping a religious institution that's been around for close to 2,000 years. Think about that. 2,000 years of history, drama, reform, and power plays. Let's rewind all the way back to the beginning, to Saint Peter, who's often hailed as the first pope. He was one of Jesus' original 12 apostles and is believed to have started the church in Rome. The man set the tone for what the papacy would become, though he probably did not imagine anything like today's massive institution. His leadership built the foundation for everything that followed, even though he faced his fair share of persecution and, according to tradition, was crucified upside down. Now that's a hardcore legacy. After Peter came Saint Linus, who's kind of a mystery. There is not much recorded about him, but early writings suggest he stepped up right after Peter. Linus's era was more about keeping things steady rather than shaking them up. Then there is Saint Clement I, who is better known for picking up the pen than wielding any political power. His letter to the Corinthians was all about squashing disputes and making it clear that apostolic authority was not up for debate. Early on, the church's leaders were more about keeping their flock together than dominating the political scene. Fast forward to Saint Leo I, also called Leo the Great, who really lived up to that nickname. He was not just about theology, though he nailed the doctrine of the incarnation at the Council of Chalcedon. He also had the nerve to tell Attila the Hun to back off from invading Italy. And it worked. If that's not a mic drop moment in papal history, what is? Moving into the medieval era, we find Saint Gregory I, also known as Gregory the Great. Now this guy was a multitasker. He overhauled church administration, revamped liturgy, yes, that is where Gregorian chant comes from, and even launched missions to convert the Anglo-Saxons. His influence stretched far beyond Rome, planting seeds of Christianity in far-off lands. But the medieval church was not just about spreading the good word. Take Leo III, for instance. In the year 800, he crowned Charlemagne as emperor, intertwining the church with European politics in a way that would last for centuries. The church was not just a spiritual force anymore, it was a political heavyweight. Then we get to Urban II, who stirred up the First Crusade. His rallying cry to reclaim the Holy Land kicked off a chain of events that shaped both Europe and the Middle East for generations. While the Crusades had religious motivations, let us not kid ourselves, they were also about power and territory. Innocent III took that power game to a whole new level. This man basically acted like he was Europe's referee, pulling kings and emperors into line, calling councils, and shaping the church's future with major reforms. He even gave his blessing to the Franciscan and Dominican orders, which are still influential today. By the time we hit the Renaissance, the papacy's reputation was a mixed bag. Take Alexander VI, born Rodrigo Borgia. If his name rings a bell, it is probably because of the scandals, nepotism, corruption, and all that jazz. He is the poster child for why people started questioning the church's moral compass. Then there is Leo X, a Medici pope, who is infamous for his role in the Protestant Reformation's early days. Martin Luther nailed those 95 theses to a church door during Leo's reign, calling out the church's questionable practices. Leo's response? Excommunicate Luther, which did not exactly stop the movement. Instead, it grew into a full-blown revolution. Paul III, on the other hand, tried to clean up the mess. He called the Council of Trent, kicking off the Counter-Reformation to address the criticisms that Luther and others had thrown at the church. This was not just about tweaking doctrine, it was a full-scale attempt to reform how the church operated. Paul III's efforts set the stage for a leaner, meaner Catholic Church ready to fight back against Protestantism. After exploring the legacies of past popes, we now turn to the church's path forward. The church in transition. In the modern era, popes like Pius IX and Leo XIII brought big ideas to the table. Pius IX's papacy was the longest in history, and he did not waste his time. He declared the dogma of the Immaculate Conception and called the First Vatican Council, which defined papal infallibility. But his reign also saw the church lose its temporal power with the fall of the papal states. Leo XIII, on the other hand, was more about ideas than politics. His encyclical, Rerum Novarum, laid the groundwork for Catholic social teaching, addressing issues like labor rights and economic justice. Jumping into the 20th century, we find John XXIII shaking things up with the Second Vatican Council. This was a game changer, modernizing the church and promoting dialogue with other religions. Liturgical reforms, a greater focus on lay participation, and a spirit of openness made John the 23rd a standout. Then came John Paul II, a rock star pope, if there ever was one. He was the first non-Italian pope in over 4 centuries and used his charisma to build bridges and bring the church into the global spotlight. His role in the fall of communism in Eastern Europe, particularly in his native Poland, is legendary. Benedict XVI, who followed, was more reserved but no less significant. A theologian at heart, he emphasized tradition and doctrine, trying to steer the church through modern challenges. His resignation, the first in nearly 6 centuries, caught everyone off guard, but showed a level of humility not often associated with the role. Finally, we've got Francis, the first pope from the Americas and the first Jesuit pope. He is all about simplicity and social justice, tackling issues like climate change and poverty head-on. His encyclical, Laudato Si, puts environmental responsibility at the heart of Catholic teaching, which is a bold move in today's politically charged landscape. But this journey would be incomplete without a closer look at some lesser-discussed moments in papal history. For instance, did you know about Pope Formosus, whose body was exhumed and put on trial in what is now called the Cadaver Synod? This bizarre episode shows just how intense the political rivalries of the medieval church could get. Then there is the Avignon papacy, a period in the 14th century when the popes lived in Avignon, France, instead of Rome. This 70-year stretch, sometimes called the Babylonian captivity of the papacy, ended with a messy power struggle and even a period where multiple men claimed to be pope at the same time. Consider also the role of the papacy in fostering art and culture. Popes like Julius II, known as the Warrior Pope, were major patrons of the arts. Julius II commissioned Michelangelo to paint the Sistine Chapel ceiling, a masterpiece that continues to inspire millions. The Renaissance popes, for all their flaws, helped turn Rome into a cultural capital, leaving a legacy that extends far beyond theology. Then there are the more spiritual milestones, like the declaration of the Assumption of Mary as dogma by Pope Pius XII in the mid-20th century. This decision, while deeply rooted in tradition, highlighted the evolving nature of doctrine and the Church's ability to adapt to new understandings of faith. And let us not forget the darker chapters. The Inquisition, the Church's response to heresy, was sanctioned by several popes and left a stain on the institution's history. Popes like Sixtus IV were deeply involved in these proceedings, showing that the papacy's influence was not always wielded benevolently. Has the Church's evolution been a path of enlightenment or compromise? Like, comment, and subscribe for more on history's pivotal moments and their lasting impact on faith.